Believe me, my life was never the same after I read that surah in the Quran. Although I grew up with a Christian faith, something inside me always told me that the truth was beyond what I knew. I felt secure in my belief until I was confronted with something that shook the very foundations of what I thought was true. It was then that upon reading the Quran, something illuminated within me, something I never expected. What happened next was something so simple, yet so profound, that it transformed everything. What I read in that surah changed everything. I never looked at my faith the same way again. Hi, I'm Anneliesa. I'm 50 years old, and I'm from the Netherlands. I grew up in a Christian family, where I was always taught to worship and follow the teachings of the Bible. Before continuing with my testimony, please write in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story is reaching and how it might touch hearts around the world. Since I was young, I was taught to believe in the Christian faith, to live according to the teachings of the Bible, and to seek a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. But over the years, something didn't fit. Even though I prayed and attended church, there was a sense of emptiness that I couldn't explain. Something inside me felt that there was more to discover, that there was a deeper truth to which I had no access yet. I wanted to understand the purpose of my life, the true meaning behind the words I recited every day. Christianity taught me that salvation came through Jesus, but for some reason, I felt that something vital was missing in the equation, as if the final piece was absent. Then one day, something changed. A Muslim friend invited me to read the Quran. I didn't know what to expect, but something inside me told me that I should open my mind and see what was written in that sacred book. I didn't know at the time, but that invitation would be the first step on a journey that would change my life forever. When I began reading the Quran, I realized that something was starting to make sense. Those words touched me in a way I couldn't explain, as if they spoke directly to my heart. It all began when a Muslim friend invited me to read the Quran. I didn't know much about Islam, but curiosity took over. I thought, why not? Truth is everywhere. The first page I opened was filled with words that seemed strange to me, but at the same time, something inside me began to stir. I didn't know what I was searching for, but I felt like I might finally be on the verge of finding what I had been looking for. As I continued, each verse seemed to touch me in a unique way. The teachings on the oneness of God, His mercy, the reverence He demands, began to make sense in a way I had never experienced before. But there was something more, something yet to be revealed, and it unsettled me. What exactly did God want from me? How did my Christian faith align with this? Suddenly, I found myself completely absorbed by one particular surah, which seemed to speak directly to my heart. It described the relationship between humanity and the Creator in a way so simple yet profound that it felt as if a door had been opened in my mind. But there was one thing still confusing me. What exactly did this surah have to do with the purpose of my life? What was the connection between my spiritual search and the words of the Quran? Something told me there was more to understand. In the Bible, I had learned that God is one, but as I studied the Quran, I realized a deeper truth. The way the oneness of God was exalted in Islam was unique and clear. The peace I had always sought in my life was beginning to make sense, but something was still missing. How could I reconcile everything I knew with what was now being revealed to me? I knew I was close to understanding, but there was still something blocking my full vision. That surah didn't just talk about God. It talked about life and purpose. And most importantly, it spoke about what was necessary to achieve true inner peace. But still, there was one last doubt consuming me. I felt like Islam had the answer to all my questions, but accepting this new understanding wouldn't be easy. How could I accept something so new when my entire life had been built around another faith? This was the dilemma I now faced, and the answer was right in front of me, just waiting for me to be brave enough to take the next step. As I read Surah Al-Fatiha, something deeply touched me. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. This prayer made me reflect on the oneness of God and how everything I had learned before seemed incomplete. God was right there, present, and this surah showed me a direct path, without intermediaries, without distractions. For the first time, I felt that God was speaking to me directly. The simple yet profound words seemed to cut through all the noise and confusion that had clouded my understanding of him. It was as if I had been looking for a bridge to God, but the truth was that the bridge had always been right there, direct and pure, with no need for anything else. There was no longer any question of needing an intermediary or someone else to guide me. It was just me and God. But what truly touched me was the revelation that followed, something I had never fully understood before. This wasn't just a prayer. It was a key to understanding the relationship between me and God, the simplicity of submission, and the clarity that came with worshiping Him alone. The Surah was teaching me not only to acknowledge God's mercy, but to seek it in the most sincere, direct way possible. This was a concept I had never truly grasped until that moment. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace that was unshakable. There was no fear of the unknown anymore, no confusion about my purpose or where I stood with God. It was clear, it was simple, and I knew this was the way forward. The beauty of Islam lies in its simplicity. Unlike what I had always believed, Islam wasn't complicated. It didn't require intermediaries. It wasn't about rituals and practices to gain favor. It was about submitting to God alone. It was about acknowledging His sovereignty in every aspect of life and recognizing that everything I needed was already provided within this pure and straightforward submission. As I reflected on the teachings of the Quran, I realized that I had spent so many years complicating my own relationship with God. I was raised to believe that I needed to follow certain steps, pray in a specific way, and do everything just right to receive God's favor. But Islam taught me something different. It told me that worship is not about rituals or perfection. It is about a heart that is genuinely devoted to God. The Quran constantly emphasizes the oneness of God and how He alone is worthy of worship. The more I read, the more I understood that true worship doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't require layers of traditions or human-made rules. Worship is simply turning to God with a sincere heart and seeking His guidance. It was as if the layers of confusion I had built over the years were being peeled away, revealing the simplicity and clarity that had always been there. In the Christian faith, I was taught to pray and seek God's forgiveness, but Islam presented a more direct relationship, one where I was encouraged to speak to God with my own words, without the need for a mediator. This direct connection brought me peace, and it was clear to me now that this was the way forward in my spiritual journey. As I delved deeper, I felt a profound sense of liberation. Islam doesn't require perfection, only sincerity. I didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations but God's, and that realization was freeing beyond measure. As I continued to read the Quran, I felt a shift within me. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but over time it became undeniable. I began to see the world differently. My thoughts, my prayers, my relationship with God, it all started to make sense in ways I had never imagined. I wasn't just reading words on a page anymore. I was experiencing a transformation in my heart and soul. I started praying more sincerely, asking God to guide me and open my heart to the truth. And each time I did, I felt closer to Him. The words in the Quran, especially in Surah Al-Fatiha, took on a new meaning. They weren't just recitations. They were a reflection of my inner state, a reminder that God was always present, always listening, and always guiding me. What struck me most was how this journey wasn't about rituals or superficial acts. It was about something much deeper, the sincerity of my intention. The Quran made it clear that what matters most is the heart, how pure it is, how willing it is to submit to God's will. This realization was like a light bulb turning on in my mind. I wasn't bound by any tradition or ritualistic expectation. What God wanted from me was simple: sincerity, submission, and devotion. The transformation was undeniable. As I grew closer to God, I noticed a peace settling over me, a peace I had never known before. It wasn't something I could explain easily, but it was a deep sense of contentment that came from knowing I was on the right path, a path that had always been there, just waiting for me to discover it. Choosing to revert to Islam wasn't an easy decision. I had spent my entire life identifying as a Christian, following a path that had been laid out for me since childhood. But as the days went on, and the Quran's messages sank deeper into my heart, I realized something undeniable. The truth I had been searching for was right here, in this new faith. However, this wasn't just about adopting a new religion. It was about shifting everything I had ever believed. It was about challenging deeply held convictions and stepping into the unknown, a place that required vulnerability and courage. The teachings I had embraced my entire life were not easily cast aside. There was a part of me that hesitated, a voice inside that whispered, "What will everyone think? Will I lose my family? My friends?" The fear of rejection was real. I had grown up in a close-knit Christian community, and the idea of changing my faith felt like I was betraying them. But with each passing day, I felt more and more certain that Islam was not just a choice. It was the answer I had been seeking all along. I was torn between my past and this new path. How could I reconcile the love and connection I had to my Christian upbringing with this new understanding of God's oneness? The doubt didn't come from the teachings of Islam. They were clear and simple. The doubt was about the shift in identity, the breaking away from what I had always known, and stepping into something that felt, in many ways, like a leap of faith. But as the days went by, the tension inside me started to fade. The more I prayed, the more I studied, the more my heart felt at peace. Islam was not about abandoning the good aspects of my previous faith. It was about returning to the purest form of worship and devotion to the one true God. I started to see that my faith in Jesus had always pointed me to God, but I had never fully understood the complete truths of God's message. Islam filled in the missing pieces. Despite my fears and doubts, I knew that this was a step I had to take, and once I did, I realized that there was no turning back. This was my new path, my new beginning. As I continued on this journey, the internal conflict I felt grew stronger. The more I read the Quran and the more I prayed, the clearer the path ahead seemed. But there was still a part of me that struggled. I had built my life around Christian teachings, and although I was beginning to understand the truth of Islam, the fear of letting go of what I had known for so long held me back. It wasn't just about changing religions. It was about redefining who I was. The community I had always been a part of, my family, my friends, my identity, all of it was rooted in Christianity. The thought of walking away from that was daunting. What would people think? How would I explain this new direction? I was terrified of rejection, not only from the people around me, but also from a part of myself that wasn't ready to fully accept this new identity. But despite these fears, I couldn't deny the peace I felt when I recited the Quran. It was a peace that wasn't just intellectual, but spiritual. The doubts I had felt before began to dissipate, and I realized that what I was feeling was the presence of God, a presence I had been searching for my entire life. It wasn't just a religion. It was a direct, personal connection with the Creator. No intermediaries, no layers, just me and God. The real challenge was reconciling these two worlds, the old world where I had always felt a certain sense of security, and the new one, which offered something that felt more genuine and fulfilling. I was learning that following the truth wasn't about pleasing people. It was about pleasing God. I couldn't help but reflect on the teachings of the Quran, particularly the verses that spoke about those who feel torn between their old beliefs and the truth of Islam. In Surah 2:256, it says, "There is no compulsion in religion." That verse struck me deeply. It reminded me that I didn't have to force myself to change overnight. This was a process, and the choice was mine. As I allowed myself to embrace the change, I began to realize that this wasn't a loss. It was a gain. I wasn't losing my faith. I was finding it. And in that moment, I understood that the only thing I needed to fear was not taking this step, not moving forward in the truth I had discovered. After months of reading, reflecting, and praying, the decision became clear to me. I had spent so much time wrestling with my thoughts, my identity, and the fear of what leaving behind my old faith might mean. But it was no longer about religion. It was about truth, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally on the path to it. The Quran's teachings had opened my heart in ways I never thought possible. The simplicity, the clarity, the directness of God's message had resonated with me deeply. I had come to understand that Islam wasn't just about rituals or traditions. It was about a deep, personal submission to God, and that was what I had been seeking all along. I had been running in circles, trying to fill a spiritual void with practices and beliefs that, while meaningful in their own way, lacked the direct connection to God that Islam provided. I knew that taking this step would not be easy. There would be questions, doubts, and resistance, but I could no longer ignore the pull of the truth. The beauty of Islam was not just in its teachings, but in the way it aligned with the core of my soul. It was like a missing puzzle piece that had finally clicked into place. I thought about the verse in the Quran, Surah 3:19, where God says, "Indeed, the religion in the sight of God is Islam." This verse echoed in my mind, not as a command, but as a gentle affirmation that what I was doing was in line with the natural state of the human soul. Islam wasn't something foreign or imposed upon me. It was a return to the purity I had been seeking, a return to the truths that had always been within me, but that I hadn't fully understood. With this clarity, I made the decision. I chose to embrace Islam fully. It wasn't a rejection of my past or my upbringing. It was an embrace of the truths that had been revealed to me. I knew that my faith in God had always been genuine, but now I understood the complete picture. I felt at peace with myself and with my Creator. This was no longer about what others thought. It was about what I knew in my heart to be true. And once I made that choice, I never looked back. Since I made the decision to embrace Islam, everything in my life began to change. It wasn't just a shift in my beliefs or my faith. It was a transformation in how I viewed the world, my purpose, and my connection to God. Every aspect of my life, from the smallest decisions to the most significant actions, began to align with the teachings of Islam in ways I had never anticipated. The first thing I noticed was the sense of peace that settled over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from avoiding challenges, but the kind that comes from knowing I am on the right path, the path that leads me closer to my Creator. Every prayer, every verse from the Quran, every act of worship became a constant reminder that I am not alone. God's presence in my life was no longer a distant concept. It was tangible, real, and comforting. I started to notice the small things too, the way I interacted with others, the way I viewed challenges, the way I approached my goals. There was a newfound sense of purpose in everything I did. I began to understand that every action, no matter how mundane, could be an act of worship if done with the right intention. Whether it was at work, with family, or even in moments of solitude, I was able to find meaning in everything. The idea of submission, which had once seemed like a limitation, became a source of empowerment. I was no longer striving to prove myself or chase after worldly success in the way I once had. My focus shifted to seeking God's pleasure, and with that came a sense of freedom I had never known before. Islam taught me to live with humility, to rely on God, and to trust that He knows what is best for me. But the impact wasn't just internal. It began to reflect in my relationships with others as well. I found myself more patient, more compassionate, and more forgiving. My priorities changed, and I began to see the value of kindness, charity, and helping others. I felt a deep connection to the global Muslim community, a sense of belonging that transcended borders and cultures. As I continued to walk this new path, I realized that my life had not just changed, it had been transformed. I had discovered a new way to live, a way that brought me closer to my Creator and allowed me to find peace in every moment. As I reflect on my journey, I can't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the path I've found. What began as a quest for truth has turned into a life transformed, one filled with peace, clarity, and a direct connection with God. Islam has given me a purpose I never imagined, a sense of belonging to something far greater than myself. And most importantly, it has opened my heart to the simplicity and beauty of submitting to God alone. The change hasn't been easy. There were fears, doubts, and obstacles along the way. But with each step I took, the more certain I became that this was the path I was always meant to follow. It wasn't about abandoning my past. It was about embracing the truths I had been searching for all my life. If you're watching this and feel like you're on a similar journey, or if you've been questioning what path to follow, I encourage you to read the Quran. It holds the answers to life's most profound questions. And know that the truth is not something to be afraid of. It's a light that will guide you, just as it guided me. If you found my story inspiring, or if it has touched your heart, please share it with others. There are many people out there searching for answers, just as I once was. Your sharing could be the spark that ignites someone else's journey toward the truth. Don't hesitate to leave a comment, share your thoughts, or ask any questions. I would love to hear from you and continue the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories, reflections, and guidance on this path. May God guide you and keep you on the straight path.